Hello, it's week 17 of season 7 of the Andy Griffith Show. This week's episode title is Dinner at 8. Aunt Dee is going to visit her sister in Raleigh overnight for 3 days. And Auntie is headed for an overnight Boy Scout camping trip. She's talking about all the things her sister has planned, and Auntie's excited about his trip. He's so excited he don't want to eat his breakfast. But Andy says, don't waste food. And Andy says it'll be different living alone. And Aunt Dee and Auntie get in the car. She's gonna drop Auntie off with the other Boy Scouts and then drive to Raleigh herself. And once they leave, Andy puts the breakfast dishes in the sink, but he don't wash them because he don't have to. And on our way out of town, Aunt Dee asks Goober to stop in and see Andy from time to time so he don't get too lonesome. And Goober says he was planning on it already. He says Andy won't have a chance to get lonely with me around. And then Howard sees Andy in town buying all kinds of unusual groceries. And Howard asks him why, and Andy says, it's 'cause I'm living alone for a while. He says he's looking forward to it. He can eat and do whatever he wants. And at home, Andy starts messing around with an old formal jacket he found when Goober comes over with a suitcase. He says he's going to stay the night so Andy don't get lonely. And Andy says that's not necessary. But Goober won't take no for an answer. So Andy leaves. He says he's got paperwork to do down at the office. So Goober stays and says he'll make spaghetti for their supper while Andy's at the office. And he's working in the kitchen. While he's working in the kitchen, Opie comes in and says he came back because he forgot his scout axe. And Goober helps him look for it. And then while he's looking and Opie's friends are honking outside, Howard calls and Goober takes a message for Andy. And then Helen calls and he takes a message from her too. But he don't write down either message. But then Opie finds his axe and he leaves. That night, Andy and Goober are having supper. And Andy says he likes the spaghetti. Goober says he has the feeling he forgot something and he can't remember what it was. And then he says it must not have been too important. And Andy finishes eating and then he says he wants to watch some TV. And then Goober says, now I remember what it was. There were 2 phone messages. Howard invited you to supper, and Helen called and was telling you about a young people's club meeting. So Andy grumbles, and he gets up to go to Howard's house. He says, since I was invited, I better go. But Howard and his mom have finished supper and are washing the dishes when Andy gets there and says he hopes he's not late for supper. And Howard has Andy sit in the living room while he goes in the kitchen and tells his mom that somehow Andy has the idea that he's invited for supper tonight. Howard says he called Andy earlier and left a message about a young people's meeting, but not about supper. So the audience sees that Goober must have mixed up the 2 messages. It was probably Helen who had called about the supper invitation. So Howard and his mom have another supper so they can feed Andy. It's spaghetti. And it's hard for Andy to eat since it's his second time tonight. And back home, Goober thinks that's funny, but Andy don't. He just wants to go to bed. But then Helen calls. She wants to know why Andy's an hour late for supper with her and her uncle. She had told Goober 8 o'clock, and she's mad. Andy says he'll be right there. And when he hangs up, Goober says he realizes his mistake. And Andy says, now I have to go eat my 3rd supper, and when I come back, I'm gonna kill you. The 3rd supper is spaghetti again. Her uncle, Helen's uncle, had helped to make it, and he's the 3rd person tonight to tell Andy that he's proud of a secret ingredient he uses in the spaghetti sauce. And then he discloses the secret and says it's oregano. And Andy says he's on a diet, but they still want him to eat. Meanwhile, Opie comes home early from the camping trip because it's raining in the mountains. And Goober sends him over to Helen's for supper because he knows Andy is eating over there. And Opie sees his pa not eating much of this spaghetti, so he says, don't waste food, Pa, like you told me not to do this morning. So Andy eats. And when Andy comes home from her trip, she says, "Andy, you don't look like you've eaten enough." So she goes to making some spaghetti. We'll see you next week for episode 18.